books.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks so much, Caroline. So I'm Abi Silver. I'm the author of the Burton and Lamb series, and I suppose you could say in one sense they're kind of traditional courtroom dramas with all the cut and thrust and theatricality you get in a courtroom. But in another sense, they're also very modern. They are contemporary, set in London. They feature a legal duo, two women lawyers, Judith Burton and Constance Lamb, who give their name to the series. And each book has a sort of topical theme. So the Rapunzel Act, which is the fourth in the series, but actually you can read each book as a standalone because each book has a different case. The Rapunzel Act is actually out today. Today is publication day. So I'm gonna, can I show a little? Here's the cover. Oops,
Yeah, go for it.
there we are. So it's the fourth in the series, and it features the brutal murder of Rosie Harper, who is a breakfast TV presenter and kind of nation's darling. And she was one half of a celebrity couple, and we all know a few of those celebrity couples. Her former spouse used to be an international footballer, Danny Walks on Water Mallard, and Danny has 2 years ago transitioned to live as Debbie and tried to live quietly out of the public eye and coach a local women's team. But Debbie becomes the prime suspect in Rosie's murder, and the story really, so it's a whodunit with lots of interesting suspects, not just Debbie, and the theme that I'm interested in is really about cameras in the courtroom. So my other books, which I'm happy to talk about if people are interested, each of them has as I say, a different contemporary theme. This one is all about what happens when our trials are filmed. So Debbie's trial is going to be filmed and live streamed, and as a result, everybody in the court, so that's the lawyers and the witnesses and the judge and even the jury, are subjected to lots of scrutiny by the media, social media, and the strapline on the front, if you caught it, is "Can you find justice when the world is watching?" So that's what I'm encouraging readers to think about, as well as trying to work out who did the murder, is to have a think about whether it would be a good idea to film our trials, to have real public justice, or might it not be fair? So that's the latest in a nutshell. Do you want me to talk a bit about me? Should I talk a bit about me?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so I grew up in Leeds, and I do still have some family in Leeds. I became a lawyer. I didn't actually know any lawyers. My father was an English teacher, which is partly why I suppose I have a love of books from a very young age. I know how fortunate I am. And I became a lawyer partly because of television. So it's quite funny that we've come full circle. I'm now writing a book about lawyers and television. But I used to watch a programme called Crown Court on Granada TV, which was around quite a long time ago in the 70s and 80s. And I used to watch it in my lunch hour from school. Like, my school was just over the road. So I would sneak home, and if it played out over 3 days, and if I actually wanted to hear the verdict, so it was this fictional courtroom with fantastic British actors, but they brought the jury in from the public, so they actually would decide, like a real jury, if the fictional person was guilty or innocent. If I wanted to wait and hear the verdict, I used to be late back to school, so I used to have to run. So that was really what made me want to become a lawyer, and I had a career in law for many years, and I had a career break when I had my first child. I have 3 boys, and that was really when I started to do some I suppose serious writing. I hadn't really had time before, and we have to fast forward quite a few years. So that was when I had a go. And we fast forward a few years, I stopped working permanently as a lawyer in 2015. And what I actually do now is I have legal contracts where I work for a few months at a time as a consultant, and then I stop, and then I write full time for a few months at a time, and that works for me. It's sort of the best of both worlds. It's not always so easy to compartmentalize, but it allows me to carry on being a lawyer and to be a writer and to do, family things. So that's a little bit about me.
Nice. So Sam, one of our admins and my sort of fellow author host, says that's quite a change going from law to writing. How have you found the change?
Well, I suppose the thing about writing is it is quite a solitary profession, I mean, maybe some people are good at dipping in and out of it, but the way I write is I prefer, if possible, to clear all my chores out of the way. So whether it's shopping or cooking or cleaning or whatever, and then just try and sit down and have as long as is possible without interruption to write. So, I mean, that's obviously quite different from being a lawyer when you're in a law firm and have a busy day where often you're on the phone a lot, and you're meeting people quite a lot. It's probably not so different from what people have been doing over the last year, to be honest, when we've all spent a long time at home. But being a lawyer I think, did prepare me in some ways. I mean, lawyers absolutely love words. We're used to long documents, writing lots, and we're used to using words in different ways. So, whether you're advising your client, whether you're talking to a judge, whether you're writing to another lawyer, you've got to be quite persuasive. So I think, and there's also the discipline of the long hours. So those things prepared me in a way. But I think the reason why I try to still do both is because, as I say, writing is really solitary, and I feel like I get my inspiration when I'm actually out in the world. So, sitting in front of a computer screen all day is fine some of the time, but if I did it all the time, I'm not sure where my ideas would come from. So that's the way that I manage things for now anyway.
There's an interesting question from Jason Kelly. It just says Facebook user. It asks you how you choose your book titles, because we've all got.
I'm really sorry that I'm peering in and taking my glasses off when I've got to look at it. I've got this curious. I was short-sighted, and of course now I'm getting older. I'm getting more long-sighted. So how do I choose my book titles? Yeah, so I don't choose them at the beginning. They sort of come to me. I think so. The first book in the series, the Pinocchio Brief, the title came to me quite easily because that is a story. So that's the story in which Judith and Constance first meet. They take on their first case together, and in that story, a boy, Raymond Maynard, is accused of actually killing his teacher at a boys' public school, and when it comes to his trial, some lie detecting software is going to be used, and it's going to watch how he moves his face whilst he's giving his evidence, to try to decide whether he's innocent or guilty. And so when I was writing that book, very quickly the idea of Pinocchio came to me, and how Pinocchio's nose grew when he told lies, and so I decided to nickname the software in the book Pinocchio. So that was sort of the beginning, and so that was the Pinocchio Brief. And I don't know, the names, I often have, there's a time in the early morning when sometimes I wake up and the house is quiet, and I haven't got anything I have to be doing, and that's when the ideas come to me, and that's usually when the titles come to me. So the Pinocchio Brief came to me now, I suppose it was back in 2016. And from then on, I wanted to continue the theme with the series of having a name in the title of a sort of an old traditional story that everybody would know about, but then the story itself, it is topical and contemporary and up to date. So what I've tried with the subsequent books is to follow that through. And as I say, I tend to write, and then there'll be a point where I'll sit down and think, we need a title for this book. And then I'll go through the same kind of process of agonizing for a while, and then it will come. And then I have to see if the publisher likes it as well. That's the other thing.
What made you choose to write about lie detecting?
So that actually came from an article in the New Scientist magazine, I have to say, which I really like. It's what's funny, of course, is I buy it for my children and then I read it. So I had read an article some time back about this lie detecting software, which is real, it does exist, and it is it's being used now, not in courts, but in some companies are using it in their recruitment procedure. So when you go for a job interview, I suppose they'll ask you if they can use it, but some companies are using it so that when you answer questions, they can look and see if you're telling the truth or not. And there was a rumour also that the army is using it for recruitment. I recently read, I think also in New Scientist, that there's quite a lot of evidence that it's not very accurate. And so that's something I write about in my story as well. But I read about it in New Scientist, it really existed, and I thought this would be a great idea to put in a story and see what people think about it.
It's quite interesting to see it be woven into a story.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, that's really what I try to do in my series. So we've got lie detecting software in the Pinocchio brief, and then in the actually I've got the covers of the other ones here, but what you'll see is we've got a new cover for the Rapunzel Act. So the first editions, so that was the Pinocchio brief. This is what the first editions look like, and in honour of the Rapunzel Act being published, so this is the second one, which I'll talk about in a minute. That's the Aladdin trial, which I will talk about in a second. And thirdly, the Cinderella plan. So those were my first three books. They're having a facelift now to match the new book, which is rather nice. So if you have a look on my Twitter page or my Facebook page or on Amazon, or if you go to ibooks.com, which is I as in EYE, which is my publisher, you'll see the new covers. But yes, so we had lie detecting software in the Pinocchio brief. In the Aladdin trial, which is a story about a poor old lady who, an artist who falls to her death from the top floor of a London hospital where she's having routine treatment. And then there are lots of different suspects in her murder. In that story, without giving too much away, I'm interested in the idea of robots dispensing medicine, if I can put it that way, rather than human doctors. And in the Cinderella plan, which I showed you, the third story, we have a rather nasty fatal accident right at the beginning, and an entrepreneur, James Salisbury, who is a car manufacturer. He's behind the wheel of his driverless car when it has an accident. And so in that story, you can probably see that I try to get readers to think about whether he is at fault or whether the car is at fault. And the strapline on the Cinderella plan is, for James Salisbury, the only thing worse than being found guilty is being found not guilty. And that's because if he's found guilty, then he will go to prison. But if he's found not guilty, then probably the car that he's been developing for years and wants to sell to the public, which is a driverless car, isn't going to sell because people won't believe in his product. So you've probably got an idea there of where these stories are going, and I can't resist. So as well as having the whodunit, or actually in James Salisbury's case, it's a bit more like how done it. I really would like readers to think about some of these other things as well. They're things that interest me. So I suppose I'm a bit immodest, and I think if they interest me, hopefully readers will think they're interesting as well.
And you're not afraid of sort of hitting quite controversial topics from the sound of things, because you've got Debbie as a sort of a trans woman and all of the things that come with that in the criminal justice system in the Rapunzel Act, and you've got a young boy accused of killing his teacher.
Well, I think that's why I like to write the stories, because I like to confront controversial issues. I mean, just sticking with Debbie for a minute, it did seem to me important to write Debbie's character for lots of reasons. First of all, I suppose, I think that representation in books is really important. So, especially in my books, which are set now, and they're set in London, and London is a very rich and diverse city. So I don't think my books should be peopled by people who just look like me, or who are like me in personality. I think they'd be very dull. So I was looking back at an article I'd read a while back where Laverne Cox gave an interview, and she's the star of Orange is, one of the stars of Orange is the New Black, and she's an African American trans woman, and she was saying in that interview how important she thinks it is for people to be visible. So in her case, obviously for trans people to be visible, and she made some wonderful comment about how if your experiences are humanized, then that demystifies difference. So, you know, she was saying how important it is, I think, for people to see role models, and for minorities to have representation. So, and I think memoirs and first-hand accounts are really important, but fiction is important too. Fiction's a really good way of confronting people's prejudices, because I think you can watch something on the screen and you might privately empathise with it, or you could read it in a book and empathise with it, but you can sort of convince yourself maybe that, you know, this isn't really what you think. So it's quite a useful way, fiction, I think, of confronting these kind of things. And I suppose the other reason really is, going back to what I said, is I should, as an author, be allowed to write about anything, any subject, and any person, as long as I do it in a sensitive way. And I think obviously you have to have respect for your readers. It's really important. And you do that by having respect for your characters. And so I do research my characters, and I do research my plot so that it's plausible. Clearly, if somebody wants to reads my book and says they think it's not convincing, or the characters are not well rounded, I mean, that's absolutely fine. You know, we all have to take criticism on the chin, but I don't think I should be told what to write. I think it would be the wrong thing if we all censored ourselves. And there was actually a wonderful article probably about a month ago now with Kazuo Ishiguro, where he said exactly that. And he said, you know, we, especially writers who are not so well established, he was worried that we're all censoring ourselves because we don't want to get into trouble. So, I mean, there's obviously a balance, as I say, in tackling sensitive issues, but my books are trying to shine a light on some of these controversial subjects, and I like to think that I do it in a sensible and sensitive and balanced way.
Is there any subjects that you wouldn't write about?
So probably, in theory, no, given what I've said. But I don't really like those kind of abduction type stories, especially if they involve children. And I don't really like to read them particularly, even though I know some of them might be excellent. So I don't think I would ever write that kind of thing. I'm also not. I'm not so good with. I will read some psychological thrillers, but I find them really frightening. So I think I'd scare myself with something really dark. So my stories are not. They do. They probably sound as if they're very serious. They do confront serious things, but I think they're quite fast paced and quite light in a way. And there's a lot of humour in there, especially Judith Burton, who is quite a cynic. She's a very experienced, battle-hardened lawyer. And she's not particularly PC, and she says some quite outrageous things. And she's always having to be sort of tempered by Constance, who's much younger and more modern, who embraces technology when Judith can't find her way around her keyboard, and so I try with the two of them to sort of show a balanced view of things.
Sam wanted to know, how difficult is it to weave so many threads together when you've got lots of suspects?
It is difficult, and I don't plan a lot, and sometimes I wish I would. I plan a lot in the other parts of my life, but I just find it, for me, it doesn't work so well in my writing. So I will have in my head a rough beginning. Well, I'll have the beginning and a rough end, and I'll sort of vaguely know what's going to happen in the middle. But I tend to then begin to write. I will have my characters sketched out quite roughly, though obviously I've got Constance and Judith and a couple of people who come back from other stories. And it is quite hard then to keep the thread going. And I do, I suppose, waste time often at the beginning when I sit down again, going back and reminding myself where things are going. But that's just, for me, works better. I tried with the book before, The Cinderella Plan, being more disciplined about planning out the chapters. And it just felt to me like it constrained me when I was writing. So it is tricky, and I do go back and keep redrafting as I'm going. So when I finish the first draft, I will have been going backwards and forwards quite a lot before I actually get all the way through to the end.
I'm just picking which question to ask you next, because there are so many. How much time do you spend on research? So I'm presuming you know the law bit really well.
Yeah, so I think the answer is it depends. It depends on what I'm researching. For every book, I consult a forensic person. And for these 4 books, it's been a wonderful gentleman called Dr. Stuart Hamilton, who's given me loads of his time and been very happy to help. So, that's really to understand about whatever injuries could cause death, and trying to get absolutely right for readers how the person has died or might have died, so that then when I have an expert in my court giving evidence about it, it's all very credible. Actually, digressing a little bit, because this made me laugh. In the Aladdin trial, which is, as I said, about a poor artist who falls to her death from a high building, he sent me a really interesting article, which was research done by people in Japan on how far you fall and when you fall off a building, and if you can, by looking at how the person is lying on the ground, if you can tell perhaps what direction they were pushed in. Were they standing forwards or backwards or sideways? And, did they just fall, or were they pushed? So there has been all this research done in Japan where they took volunteers and they did obviously use something soft at the bottom, but, they got volunteers to jump off high buildings and they measured how they fell. So that kind of thing I find really interesting. And I weaved that into the Aladdin trial. So I always do forensic research. On the technology side of things, which I focused on in the first 3 books, I had to do quite a lot of research on that. Probably the most was on the whole issue about driverless cars, autonomous vehicles for the Cinderella Plan, and all the different aspects of that. cameras in the court this time around, it's not so technical, and we all understand quite a lot about TV and live streaming. The law, as you say, I don't need to do a lot of research. I tend to anyway gloss over all the kind of procedural stuff because it would be a bit dull. So although the court proceedings are fairly accurate, a lot of other stuff I just miss out because it wouldn't be interesting for readers. And on characters, so obviously with Debbie's character, I did more research than with other characters. In the Aladdin trial, I had as my defendant a Syrian refugee, Ahmed Kabani, and I did spend time with a Syrian refugee researching Ahmed's character. Equally, with Debbie's character, I did a lot of research online and reading books and magazines, and I did talk to a very lovely local woman who had transitioned in the last few years and was willing actually to read my book and tell me if you know, if she thought there was anything there which might upset people, and otherwise I actually used some of her personal experiences in the story with her permission. So back to it depends. I just try, as I say, to make my characters plausible and well-rounded, and to make them convincing.
Sam says about the Japanese scientists, I think, wow, interesting and ever so slightly insane.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, there was one person who refused. You know, they have to say at the end some of the problems they encountered, and there was someone who, when they stood on the brink and looked down, decided they weren't going to jump off. So yes.
What I've learned about science, I studied it at uni, is that if you think something is insane, that a scientist somewhere will have done it.
Yes. Yeah, they like to test out all kinds of theories in great ways.
Yeah. The crazier it is, the better. In fact, there's this great thing called the Ig Nobel Prizes where they give awards every year to the most insane science things that have been done that year, which is always worth looking at.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, lovely.
We might put the Japanese building
on that.
Other than that, yeah. And we've answered the planning. So someone asked which of your books has been the hardest to write.
Probably the first, just because it was the first time I was having a go at writing a full-length novel that I was really keen would be published. I had done some writing earlier, and I suppose in some ways that was a bit more for myself, and that's gone in the bottom drawer, and it was useful practice, but I'm not sure whether it will see the light of day. But when I sat down to write the Pinocchio brief, I thought, you know, I'd left my job as a lawyer. I was looking for another job, but I didn't have one. And I just thought that I really wanted to make a go of it, and I wanted to write something that people would want to read. And so I think that probably was the hardest to go through the process. Once I'd done it once, it was a little bit easier.
How many books do you intend to have in the series?
So there is a 5th coming out actually only in August. For various reasons, I didn't publish a book in the last calendar year, so I have these 2 written and ready. So I have a book coming out in August called The Midas Game, which you can see is already sort of being promoted, but isn't out till August. That tells the story in a similar vein, tells the story of a doctor, Liz Sullivan, who is found dead in bed at home, and at first people think it may be natural causes, but she was a doctor specialising in online gaming addiction, so helping young men who were gaming and it was out of control. And so then suspicion falls on a local gamer, one of her neighbours, who is a YouTuber and gamer and who had befriended her, and he becomes the prime suspect in what police then decide could have been a murder. And so I talk quite a lot about gaming and game design and is it addictive and all those kinds of things. And so that book's out in August, and that was also very interesting for me to write, and took a fair amount of research. And I am writing book 6 at the moment, so hopefully there'll be at least 6. I always have lots and lots of ideas. It's been a bit more difficult through lockdown to have that split I talked about between all the different things I've been doing. So the legal work has crept in a bit more because I can do the work virtually from home. And obviously I've had all my family at home, so it's been harder to find those quiet times to concentrate on my writing. But hopefully there's certainly going to be 5, hopefully there'll be 6, and then I won't look any further than that for now.
Do you find it hard to keep coming up with interesting titles in your theme?
So I haven't so far. So I've got the title for number 6. I'm about halfway through it. I hope not. I hope it will just come. That's part of, there's always that really stressful time when, so the 2 things for me are one, the title, and the other is how is it going to end, the twist at the end. And I know that characterization is really important, especially when you write a series, because I think that readers, if they love your characters, they're going to want to read more. But I really, really want to deliver a satisfying twist at the end. So that for me, I spend ages wandering around the house, sort of thinking things over, or that period, as I say, in the early hours of the morning, trying to think of how I can put something at the end of the book that will really surprise readers. So those are the 2 things for me that are hard. But the idea just for the story and what I could write about and how it might develop, that I've always got loads of different ideas. I jot down, I've got a page called Future Ideas for Future Books, and it's full of loads of different stuff. And then I've just got to decide which is worth running with.
Are you inspired by like real life court cases? I kept thinking when I was reading bits of the Rapunzel Act to like the O.J. Simpson trial.
Yeah, so I was really lucky in terms of specific inspiration. I read 2 books by an American journalist and professor, Paul Thaler. So one is specifically about the US and televising trials generally, and the other is about the O.J. Simpson trial. And they've televised trials in the USA for years now. O.J. is now, it's 25 years ago, can't quite believe it. So there is much more than a nod to the O.J. Simpson trial in the book. And Paul was kind enough. I did a Facebook Live launch on Thursday, and he was kind enough to join us live from the USA and commented a bit, which was very nice. But that really, when I read that book, I was astonished. The trial went on for a whole year, so obviously there was a much longer period for it to have an impact on people's lives. But it changed the lives of so many people just because they were thrust into the public eye and everybody was talking about them. And of course, what they say about the O.J. trial is that the filming of the trial probably had an impact on the verdict in the end. And certainly, instead of being a trial about a murder, it became a trial all about race and in the USA in the 1990s. So I was very influenced by those books. And what you'll find when you read the Rapunzel Act is that I do have a car chase at the beginning. Well, actually not quite a car chase. I have a chase at the beginning. And the O.J. chase was a Ford Bronco along an LA highway with a helicopter overhead. In my book, it's a moped chase through East London. So, and we have the glove as well. The main clue against Debbie is that her blood-drenched glove has been found at the scene of the crime, which obviously we have the very infamous scene where O.J. is confronted with a glove in court and he tries to put it on and he can't actually get it on his hand. And so that was my nod to the O.J. Simpson trial. But the law changed here in England. So we don't at the moment film criminal trials, but obviously they are public. So you can wander along to your local Crown Court or Magistrates Court and go in and watch a trial. But obviously there are really strict rules about you can't film, you can't take your phone in, you can't just report freely what you heard. But in the UK, we have had filming for a few years of legal argument in the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, but not of criminal trials. But the law changed really quietly last year. So now there is permission for the judge when he gives sentence at the end of a trial to record his sentencing remarks. So it isn't necessarily so far off that we might choose to do something like this over here. I always worry that once you begin on allowing something to happen, it's like the beginning of the slippery slope, and it's only a matter of time before people slide down it.
I was wondering the same with the gaming, because there are cases where people have murdered over games, isn't there? Like games items and things like that. Yes,
I mean, I think there are all sorts of reasons behind that, but yes, gaming is a really difficult topic. I think the whole use of the internet and how it's taken over our lives and how much we depend on it, me included, I find it staggering how it's happened in such a short space of time. And I suppose as a lawyer, I'm cautious. And as a parent, I'm cautious. And as I get older, I get more cautious. So these things I always worry me a little bit. And the theme really running through my books is it's not so much a technology theme, although obviously technology's there. It's really all about the new way of doing things versus the old way of doing things. And this feeling that maybe humans, we always love new things and we always think new is better. So, you might buy a new item of clothing, you might get a new friend, you might try a new skill, and it's wonderful. But then sometimes after a while, the novelty wears off and you wonder if maybe there were some good things about the old way of doing things. So that's sort of what I'm always thinking about when I write my books. And I'm lucky because I've got my duo that, Constance is championing the new because she's young and she embraces new things. And generally, Judith is kind of saying, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not sure this is such a great idea. So there's that conflict there. And I think it's really up to readers. I try to be balanced and not let too much of my own prejudices come through. And for readers to read and think, yes, we like it, we like the story, we like the characters, but oh gosh, this is interesting, isn't it? And this is what my view is on all of this.
Would you be tempted to write a future kind of book about COVID?
About COVID?
About like our current situation?
I don't know if I'd write about COVID. It's a bit depressing, isn't it? And I haven't ever tried writing anything. I suppose my books they're either in a near future or a parallel now. They're more a parallel now. I try and set them as now, but fictional now. I haven't really tried to write in the future. I'm more likely. I won't necessarily always write crime novels. I think that's certainly true, because there's all sorts of things that interest me. But I'm not sure about COVID or futuristic.
So would you, you said you wouldn't always write crime novels. What other genres would you be tempted to write in?
Just sort of more, I quite like things like, I don't know, coming of age type novels or historical fiction. I really like historical fiction. I know that then you have to obviously do an awful lot of research. But those, I like those things, or family sagas. I mean, I really enjoy reading those kind of books. I like Kate Atkinson's books a lot. So obviously she did write crime with her Jackson Brodie series, but if you start with her first book, which was Behind the Scenes at the Museum, that was sort of part memoir, but it was also about a family. So I really enjoy those books, and I enjoy historical fiction. So I'm not averse to trying my hand at some of those things, but obviously they're a little bit different and it would be challenging. But I think that's all about that's what writing is anyway. It's all about challenging yourself to do new things with every book.
So who are your favourite authors to read?
So I was asked this question actually during my launch, and I sort of I said I wasn't going to say because I'm always conscious. There are so many fantastic writers out there, and I was sort of worried about naming some and forgetting some of the others who I love to read. I mentioned Kate Atkinson. I think today I was prompted a little bit because the CWA Dagger long lists came out, to the Crime Writer Association long lists, and I was looking at the lists and saw some people who I know and love. So as you've asked me, I mean, I would mention on the historical fiction side, I really like Antonia Hodgson, and she's written her, one of her stories was based at Fountains Abbey. That's her Thomas Hawkins stories. And obviously growing up in Leeds, I know Fountains Abbey very well, and it's the most fantastic, wonderful place to visit if you're ever in the area. So she's on one of the long lists. But I also like Laura Shepherd Robinson, who's written 2 books recently, Blood and Sugar, and what's the other one called? I've forgotten. Someone will prompt me.
Daughters of the Night, I think.
Daughters of Night, that's right. Thank you. Sorry, Laura. Daughters of Night. And
she was on a few weeks ago, I think.
Oh, good, lovely. And I like fiction set in another country. I always like learning about other countries. So Vasim Khan has written a new book, his new Persis Wadia stories, and they are fun. You know, they're really light and entertaining, as well as being really clever. So I love those. And that's probably, so that gives you a few. Oh, Chris Whitaker, who I've just discovered actually for the first time. So I've read his is it Wicked, All the Wicked Girls, and I've got the one that's listed is on my to be read pile, and I thought that was absolutely wonderful. Actually, that is a story. I was saying I don't like stories about abduction and missing children, and sort of that All the Wicked Girls is exactly that, but it's still the most wonderful read. So that's just a few, but there are loads of other, as you know, I'm sure from doing this program, fabulous authors out there.
Yeah, I've got a list. I call them my shut up and take my money authors. You know, like authors you'll just buy because it says their name on the book.
Yes.
Without looking, but my list of that is ridiculously long.
Getting longer and longer. I know I have well, I was going to say a pile by my bed. It's not really a pile. It's just sort of there's just books strewn all over the place. And I do sometimes read more than one at the same time because I can't wait to read the next one.
There's a really good, we had a really good interview with Chris Whitaker from who did We Begin at the End. That is one of our, we call them our author chat specials. So he was in conversation with another author called Sheila Buckler.
Okay.
And they were our first ever one, and it was really interesting.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So can I look back and find that?
Yeah, it's on our YouTube page.
Okay.
Well, we're look at. But they were great together, like really interesting.
Yes.
There's a really good question here that says, and I imagine like you've probably got a thought about this because your novels are quite good for this. It says, if your books got adapted for TV, who would you like to see play the characters that you created?
No, well, that is a good question, but it's a really difficult question because I have my own picture in my head of what my characters look like. And they are completely imaginary characters, so it's quite difficult to imagine a particular actor playing any one of them. And so I can't. I wish I could answer. And maybe you're your viewers can come up with some ideas, but it's very, very difficult for me, having created the characters. I suppose maybe it's a bit like when you read a book and then you know, as a reader, and then you see it, and the person on the screen isn't quite how you imagined the character would be. I mean, the very obvious one is Jack Reacher, but you know, they're I think it's hard. I mean, I'd love my books to be adapted, but it's quite hard to imagine what the characters would look like.
And it depends on who it is, isn't it? 'Cause the obvious Jack Reacher. I mean, I've not actually read the books, but I know that a lot of people objected to that one. But then I think that, I don't know if you've watched the Shetland series, but I find that Perez on there does not look at all like I would imagine him to. But the actor is so good that I don't care.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Like, so I think it doesn't really matter. You know, if it's well adapted, it shouldn't matter if they don't match
the way you've written them. Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely.
Sam says, and maybe she might be angling you in for an author chat special at this rate. She said, if you could interview another author, who would you choose?
Ooh. If I could interview another author, who would I choose? Well, maybe I would interview Kate Atkinson. There we go. And I'd ask her all sorts of things, because she's a northerner as well. So I'd ask her all about all her books and her Jackson Brodie and her memoirs. She would be a good one, I think. I think she'd have lots to say.
You ever tempted to bring Burton and Lamb up north?
To bring them?
Like up north, are you ever tempted?
Yes. So I am tempted, and I have been thinking about it. And I was asked recently all about tips for writing a series. And one of the things that I put in, and then I thought really seriously about it, was how important it is to maybe take your characters from a place that's familiar and stick them somewhere that's unfamiliar, and that can really add to the story. So as I was writing that, I was thinking exactly that. And I was thinking, you know, we're going to have to drag Judith kicking and screaming up the M1, and you know, maybe send her on a walking holiday in the Yorkshire Dales and have a murder and see what happens. So yes, I have thought about it, and it might yet happen.
Would you write like a standalone novel at all? You ever tempted to sort of write away from the series?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think I would. At the moment, I'm really enjoying writing the series. I suppose actually when I wrote the Pinocchio brief, if I think about it, I didn't necessarily expect there would be a series. I wrote it as a book on its own, and it was only then, when it was, you know, reasonably well received, that I thought, gosh, I'll write another one. And actually it was quite funny, because I'd written it and I was sort of basking in the glory of having finished the book. And I was at, it must have been at Harrogate at the festival, and I heard somebody else saying that their first book was out, but they'd already written the second. And I just remember this absolute panic because I was still enjoying having written the first and hadn't really thought about writing the second. So yes, certainly, if I had a good enough idea, I'd be very happy to write something as a standalone.
Are you going to go to Harrogate this year?
I haven't booked, and I'm going to just see what's happening really in the world and family wise. So it would be lovely, wouldn't it? But I'm just very cautious at the moment.
What are you doing for your launch? So apart from your live launch online, and what would you normally do for a launch?
So normally, I'm really lucky. When I work in London, I do work in the city, and there's a really beautiful Waterstones in Leadenhall Market, and they've been lovely, and they've let me have my 3 first launches in their bookshop. So that's usually what I would have done in different circumstances. And this time I did a Facebook live launch, which was great, and everybody, actually what was nice was my family helped me. So my husband and my 3 boys joined in a bit, a little bit, but they were very good in sort of helping the conversation going, and everybody was nice in sending lots of questions. So that's what we did. And I have a blog tour, which is wonderful. So I think 21 separate reviewers are reviewing my book for the blog tour, and that began at the beginning of the week, and that's wonderful so far. So I'm very grateful to all of the bloggers and all reviewers, actually, because obviously they give up their free time to share their love of books, which is wonderful. Anything else? Not really able to do that much more to celebrate, because obviously we're quite limited, but I had a very nice breakfast this morning, and I posted a picture of it. So that's really the full extent. Maybe in August, when the Midas game is out, we'll be able to do something a bit more normal.
Have you ever gone on a book signing tour?
No, I haven't. If you could arrange it for me, that would be great.
I think you're giving me more credit than I deserve. I can campaign with my local Waterstones.
Okay, that would be nice. That would be a start.
But we'll have to see. I'm just looking. Let's see if there's any questions that I've missed. So there's ones about the series. We've answered that one. And we've talked about the standalone novels. And we talked a little bit about your planning. So someone's asked if you had the whole book planned out before you start writing.
So thank you. I don't. I mean, I have the beginning. I usually have an idea of the end, but as I think I already mentioned, I don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to end. I mean, in fact, in this book, The Rapunzel Act, and actually in the Aladdin trial, which is the one where the artist falls to her death, I changed who the killer was before, when I got in the later stages of the book. So that shows how little I plan, really. And it isn't perfect, but it does allow me freedom with the characters, and I like to wander around the house and sort of talk to my characters and hear what they're saying back to me, and then go back and sit down and write parts of the book. And that's the way I write. So it's probably not a very economical way to write, but it's how I like to do it. So there's sort of, I'll know what the theme is. So for example, for this book, it's always going to be showing the impact of cameras on a trial. And I knew that we were going to start with our celebrity couple and have a murder, and have Debbie being the main suspect. But then the rest just sort of organically grew. I mean, another of the suspects in my book is a sort of environmental campaigner, Nikki Smith. And I do find I'm really heavily influenced by what's going on in the news at the time. And I was writing this book, I suppose, I started writing it in 2019. And obviously we had all the Extinction Rebellion stuff on the news. And I'd been out in London, and I'd seen them blockading the streets and bridges. And so when I was going to write someone as another suspect, suddenly we've got a campaigner, and Nikki is the head of a group which is called Dead Earth. And so I don't plan very much, but I am always trying to bring in contemporary references. So I suppose what I think is, if you looked at my books in years to come, even if they didn't have a date on them, you could probably date them quite well. And then there would be a little bit of social history of our time, really, because there are lots of contemporary references.
And one of our group's favourite questions is, what are your most memorable moments as an author?
Oh, definitely the first time I held my book in my hand. It had been published and printed, and it had my name on the front, and it was there. And then we went to my launch, and it was in the window of the bookshop. And my mum came and she saw it there. And I think, so that for me, it's the most fantastic thing. I mean, obviously now, and authors make an awful lot of their unboxing and holding their books. It is that amazing thing, that those ideas that you had milling around in your head, and then you struggled so hard to get them onto the page, and suddenly it's all there. I mean, my family are wonderfully good at keeping me grounded. So although they do read my books, my boys read my books, my husband reads my books, they're quite blasé about it all, which is probably best way to be. So, you know, most of the time I just get on with the other things that I do in my life and don't remember that I'm an author. But when you actually have the book and you hold it in your hand, that's the moment when you realise that, you know, you've created something.
And Sam wants to know how you work through the details of a difficult theme.
The details of a difficult theme. So I just keep going back and trying to make sure that I've got it right. And obviously I do have an editor, and I have, after my editor, there's a sort of copy editing process. So if I've got things wrong, there are people to help me and pick me up. And I do also, because I write a series, I just keep a note of all the key things that have happened in the other books, and even down to, with Judith and Constance, things they like and things they don't like, even like food they like, so that I don't get things wrong when I'm writing the later books. But every now and again I do slip up and somebody tells me.
One of my favourite questions to ask people who write a series is, would you write spin-off novellas about any of your characters?
I can see it happening. I suppose, I don't know whether I'd necessarily, so it wouldn't be Constance and Judith, I suppose, because they take the lead. But you very often have a character, don't you, who isn't around for long, but you find people like them. So that would be a good opportunity to take. I mean, whether it's one of your villains. I know Raymond, so in the Pinocchio brief, the boy who's accused of the murder of his teacher, he's, what I did in that story, I actually wrote him in the first person. So the reader is inside his head, and to a certain extent, one jump ahead of Constance and Judith, because the reader can see what he's thinking. And I think he's quite a popular character, and he's quite an unusual character. So I had quite a lot of comments from readers at the beginning that they'd like to see him again. So I could certainly do something with Raymond and one or two of the others.
Excellent. We've got about 3 minutes left. So would you like to give everyone a reminder of your books and where they can get them, and if you can buy signed copies from you? Sometimes our members like to do that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So reminder, so the book out today is The Rapunzel Act. And it's the fourth in the Burton and Lamb series, legal thrillers, courtroom dramas, old-fashioned stories with a modern twist, with two wonderful leading lawyers. The three before, the Pinocchio brief, the Aladdin trial, and the Cinderella plan. Each covering a different topical theme. You can read them in order. If you read them in order, you also get the lovely arc of the relationship between Constance and Judith developing, but you can also read them as standalone if you've got something you're particularly interested in. They're available from Amazon, from my publisher, www.i-books.com, so I as in your eye and Lightning Books. If you want a signed copy, the best thing is to message me. You can find me on Twitter as Abi Silver Author, on Facebook, Abi Silver 16 on Twitter, or through you, Caroline. So ask me if you want a signed copy. I have some that I have at home, because obviously I can't go into a shop and sign them at the moment, that I could arrange to be sent to you. I can't remember what else you asked me. Was that it?
That was it. Perfect.
Okay. Lovely. Well, that was great. Thank you so much. It's been really lovely talking to you.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us. Happy launch day.
Thank you very much. Thanks all.